mental models. All of us have mental models. And a mental model is a notion we have of along the lines of this is the way the world works. And we've got dozens of mental models, quite possibly hundreds of mental models. We've got mental models about how do I find a date, how do I find someone to get married to, how do I find a job, how do I progress in my job, how do I select a movie to go to, how do I find a friend, how do I make sure my friends like me. You name it, you got a mental model. The problem isn't that we have mental models. Mental models make life very simple in many ways. They're immensely useful, much of the time. Some of the time, they're not. So I repeat, the problem isn't that we have mental models. The problem is that we don't recognize that we have mental models. We think this is the way the world works. And this is not the way the world works. This is our belief that this is the way the world works. And the funny thing about mental models is that the moment you have a mental model and you define this is the way the world works, the universe cooperates and does in fact give you plenty of evidence that that is in fact the way it's working. Every time you find that there is something in your life that is not working, that you're depressed, you're sad, you're angry, frustrated, invariably you can trace it back to one or more mental models you have that are not serving you very well. One of the things that I've got to tell you now, by the way, is don't look at anything I'm saying and ask, is this true? Because I teach in some of the top business schools in the world, and anytime somebody in the front of the classroom makes a statement, very bright people immediately start looking at under what set of circumstances does what he say is what he says not true. So I'm going to make life easier for you by telling you up front that everything that I'm going to share with you today is not true, it's false. So you don't have to work on that. I'm telling you up front it's false. You push hard enough, you penetrate deep enough, everything I present to you will crumple. But what you should understand, what you should realize is equally will the models that you are presently using, which you have not subjected to the same scrutiny, they'll crumple too. So the correct question to ask yourself is, don't ask yourself, is this true or false? Don't ask yourself, is this right or wrong? Don't ask yourself, is this good or bad? Ask yourself, does this work for me better in my life today than what I am presently using? Okay? Does it work for me now in my life better than what I'm presently using? And if the answer to that is yes, you accept it, you tinker with it, make it better. And if the answer to that is no, move on. Don't waste your time judging it because you might find it useful at some later point and you don't want to prejudice yourself by judging it. Just move on. Is that fair enough? Okay. So we've covered mental chatter, we've covered mental models, and the third important building block is the me-centered universe. We have a habit, most of us, of living in a me-centered universe. And by living in a me-centered universe, what I mean is we interpret everything that happens to us in terms of what's its impact on me. Our spouse gets a great job offer, and our immediate reaction is, what impact is this going to have on our relationship? Our child drops out of high school and begins to do serious research on the physiological impact of imbibing controlled substances. And our immediate reaction is, what are my friends going to think about my parenting? Or what am I going to tell my friends and neighbors? Think about it. How much of the time do you live in a me-centered universe where anything that happens you think of in terms of what's its impact on me? Great deal of it. Well, one of the things that you should be aware of is if you spend the vast majority of your time, if you predominantly live in a me-centered universe, you are guaranteed to find more than your share of frustration, of angst, of pain, of suffering, of life sucks. That's just the way it is. You live in a me-centered universe, this comes with the territory. The only way in which you're going to be able to live a completely fulfilled life is if you arrange it so that you are aligned with doing something which will bring a greater good to a greater community, and you get to define both the greater good and the greater community. But if you do that, you will find that you can live a fulfilled life. As long as you're in a me-centered universe, you're stuck. Might as well accept, pain, frustration, and so on comes with the territory. The good news is that once you recognize it, it's not that difficult to make a shift. And my program have a sequence of steps which will enable you to do that. And I'm going to share some of that with you right now. All right. So now that we've established that, I want you to think about the combination of all of these. And I'm going to make an assertion which probably will strike some of you as very strange, but nevertheless, it's true. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that all of you are living in a dream world. We are all living in the matrix, but we just don't recognize that we're living in a matrix. We think that this is the real world. And actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an exercise now. It's going to be a very fast exercise. You'll have 10 minutes to do it. What I would like you to do is get up and form a group of 3. Okay? So, quick. Everybody on your feet, form a group of 3. You're going to have 10 minutes for this, folks. Yeah? Okay. Okay, folks, now that you've formed a group of 3, here's what you're going to do. In your life, you have something which is of concern to you right now. Around this something which is of concern to you, you have crafted a reality. You say, this is what it is. What you're going to do is articulate that reality to the members, to the other 2 persons in your group. Then what you're going to do with their help is you're going to craft an alternate reality. And there are 2 things about this alternate reality. Number 1, has to be better than the one that you have presently described to yourself. That's a no-brainer. And number 2, it has to be something that you can plausibly believe. In other words, if what you craft is something that you cannot believe at any level, it's not going to work. You cannot deceive yourself. You cannot con yourself in this exercise. So it has to be something that you can plausibly believe. Let me illustrate. For example, if you have a completely toxic boss, I know you don't have toxic bosses at Google, but they are very prevalent in other areas. But if you have someone and you're absolutely convinced that this toxic boss was sent from the nether regions purely to make your life miserable, and somebody suggests that this person is actually an angel in human shape, you might not be able to accept it. Don't even try. But you might be able to accept an alternate reality where the person is a toxic boss, but hey, you know what? Maybe it's a good thing that I have this person in my life at this stage of my career, because it'll give me a lot of experience dealing with difficult people, and that will be useful for me. Fine. You can work with that. So all clear about that? So the 2 things are, got to construct an alternate reality, got to be better than the one you're presently using, got to be one that you can plausibly believe at some level. And what do you do after that? I'll tell you after you've constructed that. So you have 10 minutes for that. Go. Okay. Quick show of hands from this brief exercise. How many of you at least got an insight? Hey, maybe there's a different way of looking at whatever my problem was. And if you get that, raise your hands if that happened to some of you. Okay, some of you. Here is what you do now, and this is important. When you come up with an alternate reality, and by definition this alternate reality is better than the one you're presently in, what I want you to do is when you walk out of this meeting, start living as if your alternate reality were the reality. When you do that, you're going to find 2 things happen. You're going to get a huge mass of evidence saying, it's not working. It's not working. Ignore that. You're going to find some evidence which says, hey, it is working. Celebrate it. But more than celebrate that, this is extremely important, folks. Record it. Write it down. Now, there's natural laziness that comes into play here. So you say, I'm not going to write it down. I'm going to remember. Trust me, you won't remember. You'll forget. You don't even remember what you had for breakfast this morning. How are you going to remember all of the evidence that you have to look for? Write it down. It's very important. If you consistently write down evidence that your alternate reality is working, you will find over time, and you start reviewing what you've written down, you'll find over time that there is a shift, and your alternate reality becomes your new reality. And as you do that, you will find that your life has changed. Slow process, but it's infallible. But it all happens if you record it and if you celebrate it. That's one of the things I want to stress, by the way. These are very powerful exercises, and they will work, but they will only work if you get to the point where these exercises are not exercises you're doing, they become a part of who you are. And as you do that, you will find that gradually they will take over your life. And without realizing it, you will find that you're living in a different world than you were before. Because what most of us don't realize is that when we craft our statement of this is where we are, this is where we're stuck, what we're expressing is the reality of our life. But it is a reality. We don't recognize that it is a reality. We think it is the reality. Or, I really wanted to be a poet, but poets don't eat very well. That's what my parents told me. So I went out and became an accountant instead. And I am not a particularly happy accountant, but I nevertheless make do. But I really wish I was a poet instead. But, I'm getting on in years, and I can't be a poet anymore, and I'm just stuck being an accountant. Is that true? Is that false? It's a reality. It becomes the reality if you define it as the reality. And most of us tend to think in terms of either or. I am an accountant or I am a poet. And if you think about it, there's no good reason why you should be an accountant or a poet. You can be an accountant and a poet. That's one of the things I want to encourage you to do. And once you define your life as, yes, I can do all of these things, then all of a sudden you find ways in which you can do it. And the alternate reality exercise is a very powerful one to get you out of the straitjacket that you have donned. Remember, you donned the straitjacket. Nobody put it on you. Other people did have a hand, culture, your peers, parents, teachers, coaches, everybody around you. But ultimately, they did it with your connivance and with your active participation. So the alternate reality exercise is a great one to get you to break out of that. Okay? All right. Let me share some other tools, and these are very powerful tools. Remember the vision that I outlined when I began my talk?